We'll get going in just a second. Okay, so good afternoon. We are back for the first time after our horrific, terrible, unbelievable, damaging storm that we survived. In all fairness, I was, posting some things. We would have gone live a few times during it, as we have in every storm. Like every time there's a storm, I usually go down to emergency operations, talk to the first selectman, Tom Mahoney, those types of people, and get a feel for what's going to happen. And the truth is, in talking to officials, there was a level of fear with that storm. There was, it was intensifying. And normally these storms like hit land and slow down as they get to us. This one was not. And so we got extremely fortunate that it turned and went right at the right time. Maria just said, "Where did I go to eat yesterday?" Last night. And Elizabeth, good afternoon. Last night I went to home. So, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we got lucky and we were well prepared. There were complaints. People were saying that the message from the first, they didn't always get the message from the first selectman. They didn't get the call or email or whatever it was. We have a system in the state that handles the emergency calls. It's a state system. You can, on the town website, on almost every town website, you can sign up for that. So if you're not getting it, the first thing you want to do is make sure you're signing up for that. But remember that that's not the only way you're reached. So people were complaining that this wasn't handled right or notification didn't come the right way. As long as you knew about it, it was handled right. They put out press releases. I get press releases. We put them out. I put them on a bunch of different social media pages. They're all over the news. It's all over the, you're going to hear about it from your neighbors. You're going to hear about it from social media. You're going to hear about it from me, from Shore Publishing, from Patch, from all these other sites. And then you may or may not get a phone call based on if you're in the system. So I also posted that link. We had people complaining that I didn't like the way I didn't get the information. I mean, Jesus Christ, as long as you know it, that's all that matters. It's an emergency. Details and facts are changing by the second. And we have to give some people a little bit of leeway. Lamont, I mean, it's a state system. If you expect Lamont to come down with a personal invitation next time to evacuate or not, well, then you might be waiting a long time. The other aspect is this. A mandatory evacuation means essentially that emergency services are not going to be able to get to you at the same speed they can get to you otherwise. So it may not mean that your house is in immediate danger, but it may mean if you have a heart attack during this storm, that the ambulance that normally comes to your home can't get there as quickly. A road may be shut down or something, flooding in certain areas shuts off areas. We know certain areas of Indian Neck in the past have been shut off during storms. There's just too much water to get through. There's no way out. It doesn't mean pick up everything you have and leave. Now, if this was a category 3, that's a different story, but that wasn't the case. So that goes out. And is it a little bit of CYA? Is a little bit of legal cover your ass by the towns and the states? Yeah, it is. Remember something, we have to protect 28,000 people. That includes against, somebody calls 911 and they have a heart attack and 911 doesn't show up for 45 minutes. There'd be a shortage of attorneys that would love to take that lawsuit. And so when there's a situation where emergency responders are going to have a harder time getting to you, they put that notice out. And so if you are someone who is apt to need emergency services, it makes sense to leave. It doesn't mean your house is going to get destroyed and you have to get out. It means that you're taking a little more risk by staying. That's really all it means. It's a hard wording. Every town words it the same. It's not like the towns are throwing more fear out there than needs to be. That's the wording, and that's what it means. And so I got a lot of calls and questions, emergency evacuation. Are the police going to come to my house? Or are people? No, that's not happening. Now, in the past, we have had storms where the fire department went out on boats to the Thimble Islands to make sure people weren't there. Those are more serious storms. That's a mandatory, we're going to get you out of here evacuation type thing. We didn't quite reach that level yesterday. And thankfully, it was for the most part, it did. I don't want to minimize the storm that did hit other areas of the state in Rhode Island much harder and may have been damaging to those areas. So we got very, very lucky here. But it was well run. Branford has traditionally handled storms really well. And I was often hard on Unc DeRoss when he was first selected on a couple of the projects he was trying to put forward. But the one thing he actually did well was handle storms well. He was responsive. He made the phone messages, what have you. Cosgrove does the same thing. Or we have an emergency operations center that comes together. Major department heads come together. Tom Mahoney runs that. Remember, Cosgrove's background was a construction company that had snow removal and debris removal contracts. Like, they know this stuff. These people know what they're doing. And the town handled all these past storms fairly well. The major concern in this one was, were people going to be without power for the weather tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday? When those temperatures hit 90 degrees and there's no AC, what do you do? And I would imagine we would have had multiple town departments from the high school to the community house open as cooling centers, but it would have been very difficult for a lot of people. So, in the past, we've had these major storms a little bit later, and that was helpful from a temperature standpoint. So, but overall, every town put out the same notice. There was the same evacuation notice along the shore. The state determines the lower areas. So on a level 1 or 2, what are the potential evacuation routes? They determine where those are in that map we put up. It doesn't have to be, I know people like to complain, maybe this is part of being election season, but overall it was handled well. And I didn't really see any significant issues in that. That said, very quickly, 2 or 3 o'clock, I was like, okay, this is a dud. Let's find out what restaurants are open. So I posted on Branford 7 who's open tonight. And yes, someone just asked, where did I eat? I went to Home. So one of the reasons I went to Home was, late last week, I asked a question on who has the best meatballs. So I have the response, Cole and Daisy's was a common response. Cole and Daisy's are excellent. Probably some of the most tender meatballs I've ever had. Last night I went and tried the meatballs at Home because they were on the list, and those were one of the common responses. Well, very, very good. More dense. So it really comes down to personal preference. I would go with Cole and Daisy's slightly above Home for the time being. Someone mentioned Capone's. I would just put them below, or at least the one in Branford anyway. And so I'm going to try to make my way around town, and we certainly still have to put that poll up and get an official vote on best meatball. And whoever wins, we'll do a podcast from there, or give them some publicity, or try them live or what have you. But so yeah, that's where I went to eat yesterday. And I know Doma was packed. So a few friends of mine went there and said it was packed. So Branford got back up to normal really fast yesterday, and that was good to see. So, and so did other towns. The notices were going out. I had press releases, from 7-8 different towns coming in, and they all said the exact same thing. They were worded the same way. Be careful. And then, it turned out not to be what we thought. I do suggest, first of all, you should probably follow, whether you're Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. You should probably follow all of your representatives. So if you're in East Haven, follow Joe Zullo. If you're in Branford, follow Robin Comey. Follow Sean Scanlon. Follow your state senator, Christine Cohen. And you're going to get some political stuff. But in an emergency situation, they're good sources because they are, they talk to the different town leaders, but they also talk to the state. And so I did suggest that you follow Sean Scanlon. He gives a lot of good updates as well. So good. We're through that. What else is key today? There's not a lot to go over. As we get to the end of August, it's the toughest time to talk news because not a lot is happening. So we have Afghanistan happening. On a local level, yes, we have an election, but I don't really want to get into the heavy duty details of the election until like mid-September. In September, we will start having Board of Ed members on. One of the big announcements today, news story that happened today, was Pfizer is now FDA approved. So the vaccination, to all those that were saying we're going to hold off on this until we're approved, that doesn't matter anymore. You've got it. Moderna will probably come in a few weeks, but Pfizer is officially approved. So we know there's probably a percentage of the population that will never get vaccinated. They just refuse. At some point, they're going to want to go to a concert or go on a cruise ship or go to an event where vaccination is mandatory. And that's what it's going to take to get them to do it. I don't know. They want to go to a KISS concert, and therefore they'll get the shot. But until that happens, until there's some event they want to go to where it's mandatory to have the vaccination, they won't get it. But there were some people, and I think, let me send you my music. I don't know what that means. But there were some people who wanted to hold off for FDA approval. So there has been a huge spike in people getting the vaccines as we watch this Delta variant grow. And now, hopefully, a second burst will come up once we have this FDA approval, and they'll say, okay, I'm ready for it. You know, you have FDA approval comes usually after all these, phase 1, 2, 3 studies. You have FDA approval now after basically a year of people getting this. And so we know it's effective. We know it's working. We also know that the company has an ability to be consistent. And that's one of the big concerns when you're making medication. Can this company, I don't know why I'm getting weird comments about playing music. I'm not sure if everybody's getting this. I'm getting some odd comments here. But can the company consistently produce the same medication over time without getting a variation in there? And that's what FDA approval shows, that it's effective, but also the company can be consistent in producing it. So that's a big deal. That's a significant aspect of moving forward. And hopefully that gets us to a much higher vaccination rate. And we're close to seeing this stuff be done and back to normal. So, from a news standpoint, like I was saying, we're in mid-August. There's not a lot to go on. If there are questions, if there are comments, send them in. If there's something you'd like to see me discuss or research, send them in. But without a whole lot of local stuff happening, we'll go towards more towards national and talk about Afghanistan. And so, Biden gave his speech last week, and I thought it was a very good speech. He makes some points that are valid. I think in general, people want us out of Afghanistan. There was never going to be a perfect way to do it. At the same time, he has to take some level of responsibility for the disaster that it's become. As much as Democrats attack Trump for what he did to the nation internationally, and Trump's mentality was us alone, America first kind of mentality, right? Biden's done a lot of damage as well. Our interaction with foreign nations and how this looks in the eyes of our enemies and our allies is significant. And Biden is taking a significant risk right now. He has an infrastructure bill that has bipartisan support. He has a second aspect of that, which is $3 trillion plus, which Democrats are saying we're going to put all of this together in one bill. Republicans are saying no, pass the infrastructure bill, and we'll have a separate debate on the much larger bill. Biden has a very tough decision to make right now of how much political capital does he have, considering this mess in Afghanistan, to try to push this through. And so for this next week, my guess is that he won't have enough Democratic votes to pass the much larger bill, that in a downtime where his numbers are dropping, it's the best time to pass the smaller infrastructure bill. And if that were to happen, that's a huge boon to Connecticut, and it's beneficial to all of us. The $3.5 trillion is much bigger. It's more ideological. It's much more Democratic issues that they've been on for a long time. And that would be almost impossible to pass with the moderate Democrats in there. But it's an interesting thing when we talk about it, because you can see how one significant issue in Afghanistan or anywhere can drastically impact the pull that you have and the overwhelming belief that's growing that the Republicans are going to make a significant leap next year in the midterms. And if Biden continues to mess this up, God help us if any Americans die. What's going to happen about 4 or 5 months is we're going to start seeing people and stories come out of Afghanistan of people that helped Americans that were killed, either retaliation or they were tortured or what have you. And that's going to hurt Biden. And so the question is, do you push through the quick infrastructure bill that you have bipartisan support for, or do you hold out and pass a much larger bill that the left will be happy about, but you won't get bipartisan support for? And it's a huge chess match happening right now between the general public, Republican Party, the liberals on the Democratic side, and Biden. And Afghanistan has drastically changed that entire debate and that entire discussion. So it's an interesting time politically, and we'll talk about more about that later on in the week. Okay, I don't know. So somebody on Facebook, I don't know who Johnny Boy G is. Somebody's posting about music. And then Melanie, I don't thank you for responding, but I'm not sure what that is. I don't usually play music for people, so we don't play anything. Richard, Biden stated that he would support the smaller bill on its own after he got pressure from the GOP members that supported it. That's the tough. And so the problem is for Biden right now is he's going to face a huge fight from the left. The liberals in the Democratic Party. How many times can you use reconciliation to pass that? And so you're going to have a political war for the next week or two. At the same time, this huge cloud over him of what's happening in Afghanistan. So it's fascinating to see what happens. And it's also fascinating heading into next year's midterms. You know, politics is interesting. I was talking to a few friends over the weekend and the role that national and local play. No matter what happens nationally, always the same amount of people come out and vote locally. Democrats in Brantford, for example, are hoping more Democrats show up. What they're hoping for, Democrats outnumber Republicans in Brantford 2-1. And the largest group by far is the unaffiliateds. And I think overwhelmingly, those are probably going to go Cosgrove's way. So it's closer than people think. It's the registration advantage is Democrat to Republican, but from a ideological standpoint, it's much closer because those unaffiliateds tend to lean Republican. Also, there was a huge benefit when the Hillary Barack Obama election was happening. People who were in the middle who wanted to vote in that registering as Democrats. So many of those Democrats are not the tried and true far liberal, far left Democrats in town. On top of that, Jamie Cosgrove was a longtime Democrat and now is not really political. But it's amazing how the number of people who will vote in a local election will still be in that 7,000 to 8,000 range. And no matter what happens nationally, it'll still be in that range because the people who care locally are typically more informed about issues. The goal of the Democrats, I'm going back to local here, the goal of Brockett, it would be my goal, would be to reach out just to Democrats, don't bother with anybody else, and to get more Democrats who don't vote in local elections to vote. Not on any issues, just to vote to get Democrats in office. I hate that. That's a cult mentality as far as I'm concerned. I want more informed voters, but that should be their mentality. So even during this term, we got a call that Brockett was sending out some sort of alerts or notifications about the storm, which is horrifically inappropriate, but he's not in the emergency operations center, but they're going to act as if they're already first selectman. They've already won. And so you're going to see that in Brantford. If you're a Democrat in Brantford, expect to be bombarded by the Democratic Party. It's going to happen. And the mentality is, let's act as if we're already first selectman. So when that Democrat goes to the ballot box, they know that name. Will that work when they already know the name of Cosgrove? I don't know. But it's not a bad political strategy. Ethics of it is questionable, but it's not a bad political strategy when you have a registration advantage. Can they somehow get 2,000 or so more Democrats who don't normally vote in the local election who don't know Jamie Cosgrove to come out and vote blindly for the Democratic Party. That's a tough thing to do. Brockett can't win on issues. If you're a Democrat who's an ideological Democrat, you're voting Cosgrove based on all his accomplishments. They're hoping for the people who don't normally pay attention to show up and vote. The reason this came up in conversation was this discussion of how much does Biden, Afghanistan, national issues impact a local election. And I will say basically 0%. And when you had Trump in office, maybe a little more because people were just angry. Jamie Cosgrove told me after the last election that people would come up to him and say, I love everything you've done, but I just can't vote for an R on the ballot. That's sad because of Trump being in office. In general, most people don't care what party somebody is. And in general, most people will vote for the better candidate. The amount of people who care, who are blindly loyal to their party is small. And we saw this in Guilford. The Guilford Republicans put up this ballot to fight CRT the critical race theory being taught in school. It's not being taught in school. I mean, I've talked to so many officials in Guilford and really in education all along the shoreline. It is not being taught in school. Any discussion of race in school is not critical race theory. I'm 43. When I was 14 or 15, I did a report on the Tuskegee Airmen. And that's a discussion about race, a black regiment in the war. That's not CRT. Discussing laws that were racist is not CRT. Discussing 3/5 or Jim Crow or zoning laws that impacted or mortgage processes that only would give mortgages to white people, that's not CRT. That's history. CRT is a lens in which we look at those historical events. So I think there's some misinformation happening in Guilford. But what we saw when they ran their caucus was it only took about 100 people to come in and get this new slate and knock out the incumbents. And so it shows you that the people in the party, the members who are hardcore, I'm voting for Democrats no matter what, or I'm voting for Republican no matter what, is a very small number. So even with a massive registration advantage in Brantford, the ideological advantage isn't there. It's not like there's a lot more liberals than conservatives in Brantford. There's more Democrats than Republicans, but liberal and conservative are very different things. And a large number of those unaffiliated voters are going to be people who look at the town and say the town's in great shape. By anybody's estimation, why would I switch course now? Why would I go against Jamie Cosgrove now? On top of that, a large number of Democrats, especially those that are pro-environment, have spent time with Cosgrove. They've worked with him. They've seen how he works with them. We have more trails and more open space and more green initiatives than any town that has, I could say, probably in the state in the last 8 years. You're not going to get a more green elected official, and he's proven that. So a lot of those Democrats will go that way as well. The overriding question is, local politics is often controlled by a very small group of people. The people show up for Democratic caucuses, Republican caucuses, is like 100 and 120 people at most. And does national politics play a role? Not really. The challenger is going to try for it to happen. The challenger wants people who don't normally vote to show up and blindly vote party. I think it's a very significant ask. And it's also not in the best interest of the town. So we'll see what happens there. Okay. And I mean this, if there are topics you want me to discuss, it's a slow week. It's going to be a very slow 2 weeks. If there's something you want me to address locally, I've gotten questions about Costco, but I've beaten that up so many times. I've gone over that so many times. So if there's questions or there's topics, or if there's something you want to discuss, send it in. I'll do research and be glad to talk about it on the podcast. Until then, we're going to cut it off early because I don't want to just ramble on. But I hope everybody is safe. Enjoy the remainder of the wet weather from the storm. And I will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock, guys. Have a great night.